The ancient witness this morning is from Matthew 18, verses 15 to 18. Jesus said, "If your sister or brother should commit some wrong against you, go and point out the error, but keep it between the two of you. If he or she listens to you, you have won a loved one back. If not, try again, but take one or two others with you so that every case may stand on the word of 2 or 3 witnesses. If your sister or brother refuses to listen to them, refer the matter to the church. If she or he ignores even the church, then treat that sister or brother as you would a Gentile and a tax collector. The truth is, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven."
And so we pray that through these ancient words, through our time together, our silence, our singing, that we may catch some glimpses of the Word of God, which is beyond all words. You know, in this particular passage, it was probably written much after the death of Jesus in order to deal with divisive behavior that was going on in that early Christian community. And the last one sounds pretty extreme. The last thing, you know, if they fail to listen to the church, treat that person as a Gentile or a tax collector. It sounds extreme unless you remember how Jesus treated tax collectors and Gentiles, which was that they were outside the worshiping community, and yet they were loved and fully embraced by God. So I don't often repeat myself in my sermons. I kind of pride myself in that, but this is an exception. And I think I do this because it's such an important topic for churches. In Tibetan Buddhism, the new Dharma student makes a commitment to wakefulness in this rite called the refuge ceremony, and they recite what they refer to as the refuge prayer, and I want to share this with you. I go to refuge in the Buddha, the enlightened teacher. I commit myself to enlightenment. 2, I go for refuge in the Dharma, the spiritual teaching, and I commit myself to the truth as it is. And 3, I go for refuge in the Sangha, or the spiritual community, and I commit myself to living the enlightened life. And what I want you to see is that being part of a spiritual community in not just Christianity, but Buddhism and other traditions, being part of a spiritual community is often seen as an essential part of the spiritual quest. It is indispensable part of the path. And it's hard for kind of individualistic Americans to kind of fully get that. In the sometimes mundane, sometimes frustrating, sometimes annoying and messy life together, we grow and develop our spiritual selves. Living together is part of the practice. Just about all the religious traditions seem to say this. And Jesus himself affirmed the power of the Sangha, or the church. Wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I shall be. As a spiritual community of fellow seekers that we can trust, it is also a sign of our commitment to live harmoniously with others, of our interconnectedness, and of the positive energy and support that we all need. And so it is within the Sangha, or the church, that we follow what the Buddhists refer to as the Eightfold Path of Wisdom, ethics, and meditation. For example, right speech is to use words to help and not harm. And Jesus said that we tend to notice this small imperfection in somebody else's eye while overlooking the log that's sticking out of our own eye. And this is similar to the Tibetan proverb. It says, don't notice a tiny flea in the other person's hair and overlook the lumbering yak on your own nose. So, these things are all kind of shared wisdom. So we avoid judgmental words. That's the whole point in our life together. When Jesus said, judge not, lest ye be judged, he wasn't saying that we don't evaluate or even challenge the behavior of other people. We still need to make ethical decisions, but the word judge, or krino in the Greek, is more like to pass judgment, to pass sentence, or to condemn. So the meaning is more like do not condemn, or you will be condemned. Now this is very close to the meaning of that famous story that's told by John about the woman caught in adultery, when John's Jesus says, let those without sin cast the first stone. And one by one the people drop their stones and they leave. And then what does Jesus say? He says, neither do I condemn you. So much about Jesus' ministry was countering people who thought that they knew the truth and that they were going to be the enforcers of the truth, and they thought that they were without sin and that they had some kind of perfect understanding which gave them the right to stone others and condemn others and pass judgment on others, and sadly, even Jesus himself. Do not condemn, he says. Do not throw stones. Robert Fulghum, who's out of the Unitarian Universalist tradition, wrote this classic book, and it's called All I Ever Really Needed to Know. And he said that what we really need to know is not really found in the universities or the great institutions of higher learning or corporate think tanks. All we need to know was taught to us in kindergarten as children. And he says, share everything, play fair, don't hit people, put things back where you found them, clean up your own mess, don't take things that aren't yours, say you're sorry when you hurt somebody, wash your hands before you eat, flush. Warm cookies and cold milk are good for you. Live a balanced life, learn to think some and draw and paint and sing and dance and play and work every day some. Take a nap every afternoon. When you go out into the world, watch out for traffic, hold hands and stick together. Be aware of wonder. All we really need to know is both simple and mysterious, and so it is with the church. Now that there's conflict in the church may disappoint us, but it certainly should not surprise us. This has disappointed many people, and there are those who have even left the church disillusioned with all the fighting and carrying on. The church, after all, is a human institution and subject to the same weaknesses and shortcomings as any other human community. And Jesus preached to his community of followers as people who would inevitably have strong differences, as people who would constantly have to forgive each other, not 7 times, but 70 times 7, he said. The question for Jesus was not if the community would experience conflict, but how would it deal with conflict when it came? Paul would later write to one of these communities. He said, go ahead and be angry, but don't sin. Anger is not the problem. Jesus did not expect those who followed him to be inhuman or above the fray, but Jesus did hold up a standard for how to deal with feelings of anger and with conflict. And so the church is far from perfect, but there is something about the community of faith which can be, and sometimes is, a model for the rest of the world. It is not a group that professes to be without sin or anger or fighting, but the congregation can demonstrate by example how to reconcile differences and resolve disputes. The spiritual community can provide glimmers and rays of light in a world that is sometimes enveloped by darkness. And sometimes, and I put this on the bulletin, one of the points of progressive Christianity, sometimes our most effective witness to the world around us is how we behave, how we treat each other, in the process of making decisions rather than the decisions themselves. And so today, I just want to hold up these basic principles about how followers of Jesus are to deal with differences among themselves. These principles were passed on to us from the Gospel of Matthew. And here he lists three steps for dealing with any kind of complaint against another person. First, according to Jesus, one is to go immediately, directly, and personally to the individual with whom one has had a difference. That is, we are not to hide or ignore or cover up the differences. I mean, there are some obvious exceptions, such as like sexual abuse, when the victim obviously would skip this first step. But notice that the victim who feels wronged is the one that needs to take initiative. That there's no room in this teaching for grudges or passive aggressiveness or pouting. One cannot always avoid being a victim, but one can avoid the victim mentality. In the church, we are responsible for building up one another, and the concern is upon the well-being of the other. So notice a few things about how to initially deal with someone who has hurt us or who we disagree with. First, it's done in private. If another member wrongs you, go and point out that fault where the two of you are alone. The expression win back shows that what matters is the other. If the member listens to you, you have regained that one. The feelings are not either kept to themselves, where they are stored up and maybe they fester, and they're not told to anybody else. That I'm responsible for my own anger whenever I have it. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, Paul would write. So the goal of this spiritual practice is love, forgiveness, and reconciliation, and that is what the followers of Jesus are about. About 30 years ago, I remember I met with a couple of the co-pastors of a very large conservative church in Cincinnati because I admired how they handled conflict in the church. And so, yes, I think we can learn things from our conservative sisters and brothers. And one of the ministers wrote this. He says, "We are committed to two related concepts, that of the clean slate principle and the good report principle." He said, "The essence of these agreements is that in the event of any feeling of hurt or animosity that we might have toward one another or the other members of the staff, we will take immediate action steps to share the nature of our feelings and to resolve them with that other person. That is, to clean the slate. Asking forgiveness is often a corollary of this principle." Now, the good report principle indicates that I will not give or receive a bad report on any other member of the staff. If someone else approaches me with a bad report concerning a staff colleague, or for that matter, any member of the body, I will immediately ask the person not to proceed with their report to me and call them to go to the individual involved and to share their concern. I will further hold them accountable to do so. It would be hard to overstress the importance of these two principles. Then if the problem is not resolved between the two persons and it's needed, according to Jesus, a second step, is that they reach out to one or two appropriate persons to work together with them to resolve their dispute. Often, if there isn't resolution, the two parties would simply agree to disagree, and it would just end with the first step, with the private discussion. And it's very rare, in my experience, for it to go beyond this. And most issues simply don't need to involve others for arbitration. But if there is, it is a sort of arbitration in which one or two loved and loving, respected members help restore this broken relationship. Then, the third step is only after these direct private dealings fail that the church, the corporate fellowship, is then brought into play. Notice that it isn't to random individuals, but to the appropriate channels. Reconciliation is the goal, and each person has responsibility in it. We are responsible for our own anger and for reconciling with others. We are responsible for cleaning our own slate. And when we do this, the whole community and the whole system is strengthened. Different spiritual teachers talk about the triple filter test: truthfulness, goodness, and usefulness. They say, ask first, is it true? Then, is it kind? And then, is it necessary? If any answer to this is no, then don't share it. And as a listener, I don't need to be hearing this if this is untrue or speculation, or if it is negative or unkind, or if it doesn't involve me and it's not necessary for me to hear it, you see. We use these filters to stop this flow of negativity in communities. And so this is affirmed, not just in the Christian tradition, but every spiritual tradition that I know of. Family and system therapists refer to this as triangulation. And you could say that these ancient guidelines say, don't triangulate, and don't let yourself be pulled in to a triangle. And so, open criticism, negative gossip are never appropriate. Critical statements, allegations, accusations to the public, to people who are not in a position to make helpful change, they're never appropriate in spiritual communities. It not only undermines a fair process and hurts the other person, it's destructive to the whole community. And it tears it down, it's divisive. And so, why am I saying this? Because it's important for us to continually remind ourselves that this is how we operate as spiritual communities. There's a scene in the movie Doubt. Rabbi, he said, I have a problem. I just can't stop myself from gossiping. The rabbi thought for a moment, and then he gave him some sheets of paper from his drawer, and he says, take these. He said, tear them into small pieces this evening and go around the village and put a handful of pieces on the doorstep of each person that you have gossiped about, and then come back and see me. And so the man did as the rabbi told him to do. And when he came back, he asked the rabbi what he should do next. And he said, now go around the village again, gather up all the pieces, and glue them back together again. But that's impossible, said the man. The wind has blown them all away. Yes, said the rabbi. Now you know why gossip is so deadly. I've read that the insight meditation teacher Joseph Goldstein, as an awareness exercise, would sometimes ask his students to refrain from saying anything about anyone who isn't present. No talking about people who annoy you, as well as no talking about people who enthrall you. No dissecting anyone else's problems or behavior, good or bad, unless the person you are talking about is right there for you to hear them, for them to hear you. And so an exercise like this, I think, can be very helpful in self-awareness, so that what impeccable speech can do is to help us unravel this cocoon of the ego. Now, I know that sometimes people feel that they need to let their friends blow off steam. I've heard that. And that it's their duty to be supportive and then to let them dump a load of garbage on you. But that's not being supportive. Because the moment it happens, all three parties are hurt and diminished. First, the one that's being talked about, obviously. Second, the listener now has a diminished view of that person. You can't put it back in the bottle. And the talker who has been enabled to behave that way. And so, whenever bad stories are spread or gossip is spread, the listeners bear responsibility too. Those who willingly listen. We all know that truth is best served by a fair and due process, and these words right here in Matthew 18, truth is a secondary issue. The primary issue is kindness. It is building up others. Thich Nhat Hanh, a Buddhist monk and author, wrote this: for a community to be a real place of practice or worship, its members have to cultivate mindfulness, understanding, and love. A church where people are unkind to each other or suppress each other is not a true church, he said. In Matthew, Jesus speaks this reality when he says, before you offer your gift on the altar, first be reconciled with your brother or sister. In other words, to truly worship, we cannot write off the other, but we must practice kindness. It's not just our gift that we have to offer, but how we offer it. That's important. And so this morning I'll just end with an appropriate story, familiar story. Once there was a monastery that had fallen upon hard times. Some of the younger monks had left in dissatisfaction, and no new men were joining. There were but a handful of monks and their leader, the abbot, remaining. They began fighting among themselves, each blaming the hard times on the faults and the failings of the others. One day, a traveling rabbi stopped at their monastery for a night's rest, and he ate and prayed alongside the other monks. And the next day, as the rabbi prepared to continue his journey, the abbot drew him aside, and he told the rabbi about all the problems the monastery had and asked him for his observations and for some advice that he could share with the monks. And upon hearing the monks' woes, the rabbi was quiet. And he thought for a minute. And the abbot begged him, can't you give me some advice to help my monastery thrive again? We're dying. Your monks will not listen to my advice, said the rabbi. But perhaps they will benefit from an observation. The Messiah dwells among you here at this monastery. One of us? Said the abbot. Which one? Oh, that I cannot say, he answered. Share this with your brothers, and in time it shall be revealed to you which one. The abbot thanked him and sent him on his way, and then he gathered all the monks together who listened in amazement to the news. One of us? Really? But who? So they asked this question, and then to themselves they wondered, it couldn't be Brother Robert. Could it? Surely not Brother Henry. But there are times Not the youngest. Well, maybe. The abbot, maybe? Could it be me? And then soon things began to change in the monastery as each began to see the Messiah in the other and to hear the Messiah's words in each word spoken. And soon people began to wander back to the monastery, and in time, new men joined, and the monastery thrived. So, friends, the way we behave sometimes says much more about us than our proclamations. And let us remember, as a spiritual community, that the Messiah dwells here in our very midst. Amen.